Welcome to the Recovery 2.0 Beyond Addiction Conference. My name is Tommy Rosen, and I am just thrilled to be speaking with Marianne Williamson. Marianne, thank you so much for lending your voice to the Recovery 2.0 Conference. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
The honor is mine. I honestly, I've wanted to talk to you and connect with you around the topic of addiction and recovery for a long, long time. So this is like a dream come true for me.
Thank you.
So, Marianne, just jumping right in, if we could start a little bit with the personal, and if you could share with our viewers a little bit, if you're comfortable, about how addiction has figured into your life, in what ways it might have touched you, whether that's directly or through loved ones.
Many years ago, I lived for a couple of years with a practicing heroin addict. Now, I didn't realize he was a practicing heroin addict at the time because he was theoretically very involved in recovery. Many years later, by the way, he did get sober. But I used to pray and ask, what was that for? And I sort of felt like 2 years with a heroin addict maybe taught me what, 25 years with an alcoholic, I don't know. But it was an intense learning experience, as you can imagine. So finding myself in that situation, naively being in it, you come out of that pretty savvy.
Now, there must have been a moment there where you, obviously, when you understood what was going on, you had to either extricate yourself from the relationship or you had to somehow find a way to move through what you just discovered. How did that happen?
A couple of things come to mind. One is friends would tell me to go to Al-Anon, and I would say, I'm such a student of the Course in Miracles, I need to work this through from the perspective of the Course in Miracles. And then months later, when I told my friends, okay, I get it, this is the truth, I get it. And they all said to me, yeah, you would have gotten that in 6 weeks at Al-Anon. So I learned that. I learned a lot from that. Also, this seems so elementary now, but I was dating the next person, and my friend, the heroin addict, was downstairs at my house, and he was calling up to me. And I said come down here. And I said to the man I was dating at the time, I have to go down. And the gentleman I was dating said, you are not going down there. And I said to him, you don't understand, he might kill himself. And I remember the moment when my then boyfriend said, then let him kill himself. I understood what he was saying. And in fact, what ended up happening in that man's life was that everybody, myself, people in his family, other people in his life ended up at the same time, in a very interesting way, without particularly being in conversation with each other, getting to the same point at the same time of enough. And that's actually when that man got sober. So, as you can imagine, I learned a lot.
Oh, yeah. Now, you mentioned the Course in Miracles, and of course, you've been lecturing on the Course in Miracles since 1983. When you speak to this particular audience, which is going to be an audience of varied perspectives about addiction and recovery, when you speak about A Course in Miracles related to your own path of recovery, could you talk a bit about that? Because that's of enormous interest to me. How could one use A Course in Miracles either as a path of recovery from addiction or as a complement to a path?
First of all, I wouldn't refer to, quote unquote, my own path of recovery. Certainly, that was a lot of Al-Anon, so I guess in that sense you could. To me, A Course in Miracles is classic 11th step work. On the 11th step, it talks about seeking through prayer and meditation, conscious contact with God. And to me, that is that no one stays on any serious spiritual path, and of course 12 steps is a serious spiritual path, without prayer and meditation. So to me, I feel that there's one truth spoken in many different ways. And I have never felt anything but that the 12 steps in the Course in Miracles were naturally dovetailed into one another. I think of the 12 steps as a kind of basic spiritual source material specifically addressing the addict, but that larger conversation of spirituality is for all of us, whether we think of ourselves as specifically addicted to a substance or people or whatever. So truth is truth. And you and I have talked about how things seem to have changed for a lot of people with how they see AA. But when I certainly over the last few decades, early in my career and certainly early in my exposure to the 12 steps, it was always understood that books like The Course in Miracles were just part and parcel of the larger conversation.
Well, that's amazing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was all.
Oh, I think in my personal path of recovery, and I am recovering, I recovered from acute drug addiction, alcoholism, and in many ways I'm a walking compendium of different addictions. But you talk about the larger conversation. For me, my experience was that I was, in some respects, there were individuals, and there is a school of thought within certain 12-step areas, programs, or certain areas, certain geographical areas, where the idea is the 12 steps are all you'll ever need, no matter what comes up in your life. And I think that I know in my case that didn't turn out to be true, and I think that can be a dangerous sort of ideology. Would you concur with that?
Well, first of all, I know the big book and the traditions enough to know that nowhere does it say that. That's number one. Number two, that's always the sign of fundamentalism. It's never the sign of a serious spiritual path. If no serious spiritual path says this is the only one you'll ever need and the only one you should ever read. That's one of those sort of newfangled projections onto the 12 steps. That to me that's the ego mind. That's not the 12 steps. I hear a lot of things in the last few years attributed to the 12 steps that I go to myself, that's not in the big book. You can't find that there. And that's one of them. And I think I have to say, I think it's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate because I know many people who have been very helped that other books, whether it's A Course in Miracles or any other spiritual material, has in fact not taken them in any way away from their 12-step work, but has only augmented it. Because, the path to God is not form, it's content. It's like the old Buddhist story about the finger pointing to the moon. What matters is not which finger it is. What matters is the moon itself. So while I am a great believer that if someone is dealing with addiction, and I would tell them this at my lectures, for instance, the most important thing for you to do if you're not sober is go to your AA meetings. I'm very clear about that. But the idea that you only read this, you don't read anything else, these are, like I said, it's these newfangled rules that aren't in the book quite simply.
Right. I love it. I love what you're saying. And those are obviously quite literally unwritten rules. And haven't served the people that I've seen who are subject to them. So I'm really grateful to hear you say that. And I just want to come out and say that I'm a by any means necessary person in recovery, as long as we're not hurting another human being. I like to pull from a lot of different places, and I encourage people to do the same. But the core for me is the 12 steps, and then I can add to that with everything else.
I think what's important is that there's only one truth spoken in many different ways. If you are a 12-step person or if you are a Course in Miracles and you go to another teaching and it is not aligned, that's a different thing. But you'll never go to you'll never read the Course in Miracles, for instance, and read something different than what you read in a 12-step in the big book. That's what's unfortunate, is people thinking, and also usually the people who say don't read any book but ours haven't even read the other books that they're telling you not to read.
There is that.
So,
Right. I want to talk a little bit about the roots of addiction. For me, I feel that addiction is primarily rooted in trauma of some kind or another. And when I say trauma, I'm taking a very wide view at that word. I'm saying that trauma is essentially unprocessed emotion stuck physically in the body that literally hasn't moved through. It's stuck somewhere and needs to be processed through. So it doesn't necessarily mean that someone has to have been sexually abused or physically abused, but a trauma can be you were at a playground when you were young. your mother lost you. You felt a sense of terror, insecurity, and a trauma got rooted there, and you began a pattern of looking away from the trauma, not knowing how to deal with it, and you began to repeat patterns that were negative and maybe developed into addiction. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about trauma and how, in your teachings, how people move through something like that.
Well, I believe that modern life is a trauma.
Thank you.
I think any situation which disconnects you from your spiritual center is a trauma. So modernity, as we experience it today, is a rolling trauma. Sometimes a trauma is one major event. Sometimes it's an accumulated pattern. So I think the assault of modernity today is traumatic, is so much of the thinking and the behavior that dominates our society is a constant pull away from one's spiritual center. And when you are separated from your own spiritual center, you're separated from your own completion. And so you go on a subconscious level grasping for it elsewhere. And regardless whether it's a person or a substance or a computer or whatever, the root is a separation from God. We have one problem, and that is our separation from God. And there's one answer, our return to it. So the trauma in many different situations, like I said, it could be one violent event, it could be just life lived today. And I think that the analysis of where it all came from is not as significant. And this is why I think is important about the 12 steps. It really doesn't matter where you got it. What matters is that it's yours now. Like the admitting, the recognition of your character defects, the acknowledgement of them, asking that they be removed. It doesn't matter if you got it from your mommy. It doesn't matter if you got it from your dad. It doesn't matter where you got it from. It's yours now. And owning that it is yours now and your responsibility. What's beautiful about the 12 steps, as A Course in Miracles or any of these books, is that they're very now-oriented and less about the event that caused the problem and more about the spiritual event, the spiritual root, which was that moment when, for whatever reason, we separated from the essence of who we are. We separated from God. And the level of hysteria that this represents is beyond anything that the conscious mind can even imagine. And in that moment, we grasp in that reenactment of that separation, we grasp hysterically for that which we think would at least mimic the feeling of completion that we feel that we've lost. So every moment is that in life, and I think also, the ego mind is our addiction to a fear-based way of thinking. So in a way, you don't have to be an alcoholic. Sometimes the one, joke I make sometimes about 12-step people, sometimes they think they have a monopoly on suffering. You don't have to be an addict. You don't have to be a professed addict to find this a very painful plane of existence. And I think that's important. Nobody has a monopoly on suffering here. And I think that in a way we're all in recovery from the perspective on life and the thought system that dominates this planet. So the ego mind is addiction to separation from who we are. And in that sense, the path of enlightenment is a path of recovery.
Thank you so much. If addiction is sort of the result of a separation from spirit, from God, and the path of recovery is a return to spirit or God, what are the elements that make up that path? Is it? It doesn't. Obviously, it's not a linear journey. How do we get there? What are the pieces of the puzzle?
Well, the pieces for the puzzle, there's one truth spoken many different ways, and I don't think you can get a more of a genius piece of the puzzle than that which is given to us in the 12 steps. Obviously, first of all, there is the recognition that you can't do this by yourself. There is the recognition that there's a power in you but not of you that can do for you what you cannot do for yourself. In the Course in Miracles, it talks about how there is no order of difficulty in miracles, that you have come to that point, whether you're talking in Course language or AA language, that you've come to that point of realization that you are broken, that you cannot fix yourself, that God can and God will, as He is invited into your life, that you're going to have to look at your own defects, you're going to have to own your own shadows. As the Course in Miracles says, You cannot just bring the light to the darkness. You must bring the darkness to the light, is how it's put in the Course, which is the same as in the steps. To admit the exact nature of your wrongs, to own it, to do amends, which in the Course is much like part of the doing of the atonement. The 12-step program is a program of amends. This issue of atonement, whether it's the Catholics who go to confession or the Jews on Yom Kippur every day, or every year, or the making of amends in 12 steps, this idea of owning our darkness, releasing it and asking God to take it away. He says in the Course, I cannot take from you what you will not release to me. That's very much like in the 12 steps. That's seeking to live a better life now. Always knowing that you are accountable for that on any given day, that you may not make it in any given situation, but God in His mercy and God in His grace will help you in the next minute if you will admit the exact nature of your wrongs, own it, atone, make amends, and that without constant prayer and meditation, you are not likely to remain in this place. And that we seek through prayer and meditation to have that divine alignment and to do our best on any given day, knowing that God will help us. That's the essence of it. Now, you can talk about it in Christian language, in Jewish language, in Buddhist language, in Muslim language, in AA language, in Course in Miracles language, but the path is the path, right?
Yes. And of course, the end of that path is serving others.
Oh, absolutely, because we only get to keep what we give away. And I think that part of what makes the 12 steps, it's one of the most poignant aspects, is that we will be there to help those who have the same need and the same yearning that we had the first day we walked in here. Exactly. And someone reached out to us. And that is how we remain. You know, we do not believe in a punishing God, but we believe in a balancing universe. And it is extraordinary how the way you put back into the universe what you at one point in your life sort of took away from it is also that which will give you the happiness in your life. And I think you're an example of that. I'm an example of that, that we actually, I know I feel my whole career is God saying, you will spend the rest of your life, young lady, doing everything you can to help other people not be as stupid as you were.
Thank you so much.
Worked out nicely.
Yes, working out beautifully. I just want to get your opinion on something. There's generally, since we're on the 12 steps for a moment, and I've been a beneficiary of the 12 steps and the fellowship there in the program. So there's a generally held principle that in some way, shape, or form, the qualification, the designation of a person being an addict or alcoholic sets them apart from other human beings. That there's some difference in some way. That they, at least in the way that they behave around substances or the addictive behavior of their choice, that this makes them different in some way. And I struggle a little bit, I have to be honest, with that idea, because I fundamentally believe, certainly on a spiritual level, that there's no separation and no difference between us, that we're all children of God and we're drops in the ocean of the divine. And so do you feel that that there, I guess I look at the human condition and everybody's subject to it, and everybody seems to be recovering from something. And so I just sort of, I bring us all into this, I wish there was another word, I guess is what I'm saying, than addiction. Because I sort of see everybody working at it.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying. This is a very serious issue. On one hand, addiction is a self-diagnosed disease. And there are some people who obviously need to be very clear, I am an addict. There are people that I think we've all known for whom not admitting that is a dangerous, slippery slope. Having said that, the ego mind takes that to mean I'm special. I'm more messed up than other people is actually another way of saying I'm special. I'm special. And so the ego will do that with anything. So the issue is the Course in Miracles says all of us are special and none of us are special. And yes, it goes back to how a shadow side of the 12 steps is when people, think they're suffering and somehow they suffer different. They suffer more. This makes me different. And if anything, a deep spiritual path of any kind at its depth makes us realize we are no different than others. I love in the Course, we're all special and none of us are special. So yeah, the suffering of the addict is no different. So yeah, I'm more messed up. I'm an addict, you see, often really means I'm a human being, you see.
Right. I appreciate that perspective. the steps, of course, as you so beautifully went through them just a moment ago, they were dealing a lot with, and their focus to a great extent is on resentment. And so as we're asked to do our personal inventory, it's interesting that we're asked to look at our life not as not through the perspective of history of, oh, I did this and then I did that and this. We're looking at our life through the lens of resentment. We learn about ourselves through the resentments that we've been carrying for however long in our life. And when you talk about resentment, of course, you're going to have to talk about the F word, which is forgiveness. And so if you could speak a little bit about this thing called forgiveness and its shadow side, resentment, how do we move through those? What's that about? How does the Course in Miracles look at that?
Well, the Course in Miracles, the word, rather than resentments that's used mainly, is grievances. And the Course in Miracles says a grievance is an attack on God's plan for salvation. You can have a grievance or you can have a miracle. You cannot have both. This is the issue. Miracles occur naturally as expressions of love. As long as I love you, a miracle will occur. If I am withholding my love for you, which I do if I have a resentment, if I'm withholding my love for you because I have a grievance against you, I am blocking the sun. I am deflecting the miracle. I cannot see guilt in you and have a miracle. Because to the extent to which I'm seeing guilt in you, I'm dropping a veil in front of the miracle impulse. In every moment, I'm either allowing a miracle or deflecting a miracle, which is the same as host to God or hostage to the ego, is the same as focusing on your innocence or focusing on your guilt. And resentment is a way of focusing on your guilt. Now, you might have made a mistake 5 minutes ago. You might have made a mistake 5 seconds ago. But I have a choice. In this moment, I can see you through the eyes of my mortal mind and through my physical senses and through the filter of what you did before this moment, in which case it's easy enough to find your guilt and focus on that. But the problem is I can't do that and be free of my own guilt. You only get to keep what you give away. So and any addict knows that most addicts have enough to feel guilty about because of the ways they acted out in their own past, if nothing else, or the things that they feel that they did to deny themselves their own good, or things they did to other people. So the whole idea of recovery is to have a miraculous redemptive experience of I can be now what I was not before. But heaven, as the Course would say, heaven is entered 2 by 2. Which means I cannot find inner peace unless I'm willing to take you there with me. So if I'm going to focus on your guilt, I can't be free of my own. If I'm going to have a resentment, focus on a resentment or a grievance, I cannot have the miracle of new beginnings. Only if I'm willing to forgive you by recognizing that you are not your error. You are not your error. And that's what mercy is. Mercy is one of the most powerful words. It doesn't mean you didn't make a mistake. It means you might have, and guess what? So have I. And if somebody's an addict, they have enough of those things. My hope in life is that other people will not hold me to my mistakes. And the only way I can ever hope of a life in which I'm not being held to my past mistakes is if I'm not willing to hold people to theirs. So I can either have a resentment or I can have a miracle. I can have a grievance or a miracle. And to say I will focus on the innocence of who you are rather than on the guilt of your behavior, that is what forgiveness means. Forgiveness is a selective remembering. It doesn't mean you're a jerk, but I'm spiritual now, so I forgive you. That's actually judgment.
Yes.
Forgiveness.
I've done that before.
Yeah. Real forgiveness means you're not what you did. And I am willing to look at you the way God looks at you, which is with mercy and compassion, because I know who you deeply are. And I know that at the deepest level, in the moment when you did that, you wouldn't have if you'd known how to do better.
And so how can we counsel individuals that are not yet ready to let go of it? And I'm thinking about now, let's say somebody's legitimately been hurt. I'm just thinking of a child who's they were neglected by their parents. They grow up, they're 15, 16, 17 years old. They're starting to act out. Of course, this is mirroring my own experience. Although my parents weren't necessarily neglectful, there was other issues there. But you have a genuine grievance, and you're so angry and so sort of caught up in the grievance. The beauty of the miracle of forgiveness isn't taking root yet. What can you do?
Well, I think that we learn in life that there's a difference between honoring an emotion and indulging an emotion. There's a difference between processing and spewing. And that's why we go to therapy. That's why we go to recovery. That's why we do spiritual support groups, is to have a safe container. You know, in the Old Testament, there's 40 years between the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt and deliverance of the Promised Land. In the New Testament, there's the 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection. And those periods of time are symbols for the time it takes from the experience of the wound to the deliverance of the new condition. But the issue is you have to go through those 3 days. That means you have to experience the suffering in the desert. You have to. That's the tomb time in the New Testament. That's the suffering in the desert in the Old Testament. It's the pain of the cross, the pain of the slavery. But it's 40 years. It's not 80 years. It's 3 days. It's not 6 days. And what that means is that there's a period of time. And if you don't know how you're doing with that, your best friends can tell you. Because when you are honestly doing the work, having to feel the feelings, having to feel the grief, having to get in touch with what's going on, it does not smell like rotten meat. It's something which is noble, and it's true, and it's beautiful, and other people can appreciate that something sacred is going on. When and if the time comes when you're coddling it, you're using it. You're using it as a calling card. You're using it as an excuse. It does begin to smell like old meat. And people will not be as attracted to hearing the story one more time. At which point, my hope is that you will become as bored by this story as everybody else around you already is. So it's a matter of a timing and a rhythm, and you can feel it in your gut, at which point enough is enough.
Yes. Thank you. How do we help? Well, I guess the best way I could put this is, how about the situation where you feign forgiveness to somebody when you're not really ready yet? You're still angry and bitter, you have a resentment, but you feign forgiveness to that person, and there's this moment where you're just like, it hurts you inside to do it.
Well, you fake it till you make it. And I think one of my favorite statements from AA is it's easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking than it is to think yourself into a new way of acting. I think that's one of the better truisms from the 12 steps. I might still feel it. I might not be processed and enlightened through it enough to no longer feel it, but I am at least advanced enough that I'm not going to call you. I'm not going to lay it out. I'm not going to write it. I'm not going to spew my anger at you. So, it is a process. And sometimes we're not yet at the point where we do not anymore feel the anger, but sometimes we're at a point where I do still feel it, but I have enough self-control and impulse control that I'm not going to do something stupid, because I know, as the Course in Miracles says, when you have an attack thought about someone, imagine that there is a sword being held over their head, and then recognize that it's not falling on them, it's falling on you. Once you realize that we are one, that at the deepest spiritual level there is no separation between us, it's just like I was talking before, the only way I can be merciful towards myself and experience God's mercy, to really experience not just the knowledge, but the experience. God wants me to get up and live a new life despite what I have done. The only way I can have that experience is if I'm willing to give it to you. And the same with attack. So with forgiveness, it is a process. We've all been there. And sometimes you even think you've forgiven, and then something happens and you realize you haven't. But the fact that it's a process, the fact I forgive you doesn't mean we have to have lunch yet. But by being on these paths, we do get to the point where if I have to really just let it out, it can be in a safe place, either with my pillow, my therapist, or a 12-step meeting, and I'm not going to do something idiotic like screaming at you in public.
Thank you.
Right?
I'm wondering about the Course in Miracles being helpful to agnostics and atheists, and how obviously it's such the word God is it's replete and it's ubiquitous, and so if you want to benefit from the Course in Miracles, but you're struggling around even your belief in God, how does that work?
Well, first of all, I love how in AA they talk about God as you understand him. I think that's, so magnificent. Only God could have come up with such a magnificent expression. In terms of the Course in Miracles, first of all, the Course does not claim to be for everyone. I think if it's for you, you know it. I think there are many different statements of truth. The Course in Miracles is not trying to get us to believe in God. It's getting us to believe in one another. And the Course in Miracles says, in that is the experience of God. So the Course is not about belief. It says belief of itself does not mean anything. It's experience. And if the word God would break communication, the word God himself would not have you use the word God. It's not about words. It's about an experience of love and forgiveness. One of the things I love in the Course is a line where it says, some people conspire with God who do not yet believe in him. There are people who live in love for their fellow human beings. They are conspiring with God from that perspective, whether they believe in God or not. And obviously there are people on this planet, whole religions as a matter of fact, who hate in the name of God. So that would have nothing to do, it's all words.
Yes. I want to move our conversation to a new topic, which is a specific form of addiction, which we see a lot of, and it's addiction to power.
Okay.
And I want to look at that, if you wouldn't mind. I know, especially through Sister Giant and a lot of work you've done, you've expressed very plainly and clearly that how important it is for people who hold spiritual values and principles to speak up and to get involved in the political process, and how critically important that is. And I know that one of the addictions that we're certainly looking at, and we're all feeling, whether we're aware of it or not, is this addiction to power. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and those issues.
I don't think the addicted to blank. I don't think the blank is as important as the addicted to. Some people are addicted to power. Some people are kind of addicted to a certain level of powerlessness. So what does that mean? People are addicted to the power of money. People are addicted to the power of political power. Whenever I'm in a conversation where I'm talking about what other people are addicted to, I'm not in my deeper, God has one person that your job is to monitor vigilantly full time, and that's yourself. So the Course in Miracles, power is an interesting issue because it is when we realize of ourselves we are powerless, that the power of God can move through us. And he says in the Tao Te Ching that the real leader is someone who sees himself or herself as a follower. So the kind of political power, leadership power that I think we're all is emerging now is one in which we realize our function is to hold a space for the brilliance of others. In other words, the more humble we are, the more powerful we are. But even though I think the issue of power is a significant conversation, the idea of pointing at other people and addiction to power, it's not a conversation that anytime I'm involved in what other people are addicted to, I'm sort of off topic for what I believe God would have me look at.
Not my intention to pull you off there. So I guess let me rephrase.
Okay.
How would you treat addiction to power versus any other addiction? Or I mean, I guess maybe you answer that by saying that you're not seeing its addiction to whatever is going to require the same treatment?
Well, from my training as a Course in Miracles student, my job is to listen with the fullness of my heart and to see a person in their innocence. That's what heals people. What heals people is the presence of compassion and non-judgment. What heals people at an AA meeting, what heals people at a Course in Miracles counselor, what heals people with the Course, is that they're in the presence of someone who sees them in their innocence. So the Course in Miracles says that the miracle worker's primary responsibility is to accept the atonement for himself. The Course in Miracles would say, I cannot be of any healing use to anyone who I'm judging. I can't be of any healing use to anyone who whose disease I'm naming like I think I don't have it. And so if I am asking only to see the innocence of that person, not who they are as an addict, but who they are as a child of God, then God himself, the Spirit of God, will give me the words to say that would be most of service. Knowing that I'm not healing that person. None of this grandiose, I'm counseling, I'm treating. Whereas the Course in Miracles really heals you of that kind of a notion, because that's seeing yourself as special. From a Course in Miracles perspective, you're not the water, you're the faucet. And that water can be turned off anytime, by the way. And so your job is to put your mind in the miracle-ready position of the faucet. And that means I'm not here to heal anyone. I'm here to join with you in the knowledge that, number one, you are completely innocent. I see your innocence, even if you don't see it. I'm here to hold in my own mind that in God all things are possible. And from that place, I will be guided to the thoughts and to the words that could be of use and of service to you. And within that is the knowledge that not only are we here so that I might be of value to you on your journey, you are equally here to me to be of value on mine. Because whatever it is I move to say to you, it is in order to fortify within myself. So how do I treat someone's addiction to power is just so not in the conversation that the Course in Miracles would give us. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course, of course. No, I love it. As usual, I'm being schooled through this process, so I'm grateful. I mean, it's really, and I really mean it. It's been people will say, you know, I'm on the road right now with Mast and Kip, and we've been out doing a tour and teaching, and people will come up and say, "Oh, Tommy, I watched the last Recovery 2.0, and it really, really changed my life." And which of course is very encouraging, and I love that, and it's wonderful. And I immediately will say to them, well, believe me, it has completely changed mine too, because I've been, I mean, just by virtue of the fact that I'm doing these interviews, I've literally, these teachings are being offered to me through this format, and so maybe I'm the one who needs them the most.
Well, yeah, and you realize that, and I think that that's what people are applauding you for. The sophisticated listener is not seeing you as the source of the material. What they're applauding you for is whatever the work is that you do in your life that makes you such an open channel to receive the information and to be able to pass it on. I had an interesting experience many years ago. It was on a Saturday morning, many years ago, at a church I was speaking at in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. And there was a woman there. There were homeless people would be around fairly often. And there was a woman, and she started yelling from the back of the room. And I asked her name. She said her name was Gladys. And I don't remember what she said. But my task, as I saw it, was to say something to get Gladys to stop talking during my lecture. I said something. I don't remember what it was. It worked, in that it shamed her in some way. It made everybody laugh, and she left the room. Now, in that moment, I knew that what had happened, but I went on and lived my life that week, and I wasn't even thinking about that incident. The next Saturday morning, I went to give my lecture as usual. And as I was about to open my mouth, I heard within myself, apologize for what you said about Gladys, or apologize for what you said to Gladys. I can't remember which. And it was kind of shocking. And my first thought was, look, there are a lot of people here who weren't even here last weekend, so I don't have to like remind them that I made that mistake. And number two, for the people who were there are a lot of people who probably don't even remember what happened with Gladys. So I started to give my talk. At which point, in my mind, it was like I saw like snow on a television set. And it was as though I heard something inside myself. Apologize for what you said about Gladys, or there will be no lecture. So I think that we become, and yourself, for instance, aware, and the universe will make us aware if we're not, that this water doesn't have to come through your faucet. And if you take on certain attitudes, and you start believing certain things, the water will simply move on to a more open faucet, and I think it makes it makes you very desirous of the humility that is necessary. It's like when we exalt God is when we are exalted, and when we exalt ourselves, intelligent people can smell it, and they're not impressed.
Right. Well, I'm thinking now about so a lot of people in recovery, particularly in early recovery, they're going to come up against things that they've done wrong that they're unwilling to forgive themselves for.
Right.
And I feel that there's a connection, a big connection between that idea and relapse. And I feel it's something that just people have to move through somehow. And is the process of self-forgiveness any different from the process of forgiving another human being?
Well, I think that what you said is very true and very significant. The only pain worse than God, I blew it, is God, I blew it again. To be reminded of mistakes we've made in the past. And I think what you just said is one of the reasons why the daily keep coming back. Have you been to a meeting today is so important. Because the ego mind is like a thief that will just wait patiently outside the door. And whether it's with addiction, which means a behavior that could literally kill you if you do it again, or any other kind of ego manifestation, it is more than glad to just wait till you're stressed, wait till you didn't meditate today, wait till you didn't pray today, wait till something happens. And if we do not fortify ourselves proactively with light, the darkness will set in. If we do not proactively fortify ourselves with prayer, with meditation, or for the addict, with at meeting every day, with the sponsor, with the support group, then the thief will just climb in any window, will climb in any door. And yes, I mean, something that you've been in meetings, you've been praying, you've been meditating, and you have come to a place where I see it in larger context. I've made amends. I know the story of the prodigal son. I know God wants me to be a better person now. And there will be other people behind me who maybe will not make those mistakes because I made them, and God in some greater merciful way is going to make it all good. And you're able to handle that and move forward. But then one day you don't go to a meeting. You don't pray. You don't meditate. And that same memory, that same stab of self-hatred, which when it came at you 3 weeks before you were able to handle with self-forgiveness, you're not able to handle with self-forgiveness today, thus the relapse. And to me, all that means is, it's as I say to people, it's like with physical exercise. You never get to a day when you don't have to do it anymore. You never get to look at yourself in the mirror and go, that's hot, I don't have to exercise anymore. And same with spiritual exercise, every day. Yes, and for the rest of our lives.
Well, thank you so much. Do a lot of people who come to see you, and a lot of people who end up following the Course in Miracles, are they people who are struggling with addiction typically? You see a lot of that?
Back in the old days, early in my career, there seemed to definitely be a lot of exchange, interchange. A lot of the AA people you met were the Course in Miracles people you met. In the last few years, as you and I were discussing earlier, there's this attitude that you see. In other words, when I began my career, if you were in AA, people were likely to say to you, oh, go to those Course in Miracles lectures, because that's really going to help you with the 11th step. You don't see that as much quite anymore, although because I use a lot of 12-step imagery and all that kind of thing, I see a lot of nodding of heads, but obviously I'm not going to ask people, and it's also my job to not care.
Right. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about meditation, what your meditation practice is, and maybe even could you describe a meditation practice that people or beginners could follow?
Well, first of all, I think it's important these days for people to know that not all relaxation is meditation. All meditation is relaxation, but not all relaxation is meditation. Some people say, I meditate by walking along the beach, or I meditate by just closing my eyes and thinking, or lighting a candle. That's not meditation. Real meditation is actually a shift in brainwave functioning. So I am a student of the workbook of the Course in Miracles, which is basically a meditation path, and I personally do transcendental meditation. There are many different kinds of meditation paths, but the idea of an actual technique, including a mantra or some version of a mantra, is extremely important. I also think that too many people in today's world, there are a lot of spiritual dilettantes, and sometimes I'll find people saying, They want a kind of situational answer. Can you give me the silver bullet for this issue? Or can you give me the silver bullet for that issue? Can you tell me what page to read for this issue or what page to read for that issue? And no, and that's like with AA. It's not just about treating your disease. It's about embracing a life with God, such as you had not had before. And in that experience, the disease is transcended,
Lifted, yes.
the acting out, the behavior of the disease. So when you ask, do I know something that the beginner can begin with? There are three types of people. There are people who know what their path is, and they're walking it. There are people who know what path calls to them, but they're just not doing it. And there are people who would say, well, I would like to meditate, I would like a serious spiritual path, but I don't know what my teaching or book would be. And for those people, if you pray, books will literally fall at your feet. So for people who resonate with the kinds of ideas in the Course, my answer to that question would be picking up the workbook of the Course in Miracles. But we are drawn. Some people will feel like doing Buddhist meditation. Some people will feel like doing Kabbalistic meditation. Some people will feel like doing transcendental meditation. If you know that that kind of reconnection, that reestablishment of what in AA is called conscious contact, is what you yearn for, the way to go about it will present itself to you. The issue then is whether or not you choose to do it.
Who wrote the Course in Miracles?
The Course in Miracles was given through a process that the woman called inner dictation to a woman named Helen Schuckman at Columbia University, 1965 to 1971. She would receive the dictation, and she would write down in shorthand what she heard, and then she would show the shorthand to her partner, her colleague, Bill Thetford, who would type it out. It was a collaborative venture, which the Course says is very significant. It could not have happened without it having been two people who joined together in a willingness to find another way. The Course says salvation begins when we consider the possibility there might be another way. There is no author, however, mentioned in the book. That voice which dictated referred to itself to Helen Schuckman as Master J, but the opinion that people have about where it came from is irrelevant to the point, which is the attainment of inner peace through the practice of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I literally asked that question because I didn't know the answer, and I've always been curious. So thank you. Well, Marianne, I'm grateful for your time. We're coming more or less to the end of our time together for this particular interview. I'm wondering if you could spend a couple of minutes. Imagine you're speaking to an audience of people that have come to ask you for help because they are struggling with addictions of all kinds, and they've come directly to you, and they need a pep talk. They're in a state of desperation. They could be families of people who struggle. They could be people who struggle themselves. Could you please address these people and help them to know that there's hope? What would you say?
You know, Tommy, I never think of myself as trying to get a message out. I think of myself as trying to get a message in. I don't think it helps people for me to perceive them as people who need my help. I think it helps people for me to see them as healed and whole. Because in my presence, if I see them as healed and whole, they are more likely to become healed and whole. A weak person does not need to be seen as weak. A weakened person needs to be seen by someone who knows your strength is within you. You have simply lost contact with it. The Course in Miracles says charity is when you are willing to see a person in a more advanced state than they're manifesting at the moment. So, once again, going back to what the Course says, that the primary responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. I have talked to thousands of people who, at that particular moment, were on the floor. as I have been on the floor in my life. And people who helped me were those who, for whatever reason, did not just think I was worthy of help, but seemed to believe that I would get there. And they spoke to the strength in me. So I don't think anybody needs any more help than I do. We all need the same help. And we all have our times when we're in the valley. All of us, until total enlightenment. And where would any of us be? But when I'm in the valley, I'm not helped by those who think I'm pathetic. I'm helped by those who know, you can do this, Marianne. I know you can, because I know that God is in you. And that, I think, for the most intelligent person, is the pep talk they want. Remind me again who I am when I'm strong. Remind me again that I can be that. Remind me, speak to the strengthening. You know, that's what in the New Testament, that's when Jesus says, Lazarus, rise. He's not dead, he's only sleeping. That's what that archetype is. When you are down on the floor, when you've lost everything, when you've messed everything up, when you've ruined everything, when you've blown everything, when you've lost everything, the miracle is when you are reminded of the you that was not expressing itself when you did those things, but was always there and is being held in trust for you by God until you are ready to receive the miracle of who you are. But it was not obliterated. That which you are, the greatness in you, cannot be uncreated. And God remembers who you are. Even in those times when you forgot who you were and acted out of profound unconsciousness and insanity, the real you was there. It was just hidden. It was eclipsed. You know, the sky is always gray. Sometimes the sky is always blue. There are just sometimes gray clouds in front of it. And that's what we need, is to be reminded. So in that place, you don't even need a quote-unquote pep talk. You need to be spoken to as the beautiful child of God that you are. And so I guess the bottom line for me is what I would say to people is thank you for coming. It's an honor that you're here.
Thank you so much, Marianne. How can I know people are going to want to connect with you, some of them very far away. How can people connect with you online? How can they connect with your books, find your videos, etc.?
Thank you so much. Well, if you go to Marianne.com or MarianneWilliamson.com, Marianne.com, or I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Amazon.com has my books, whatever. If anybody wants to find me, I'm pretty easy to find.
Thank you so much. I'm super grateful for you lending your voice to this conference. It's meant a lot to me, and I know it's going to mean a lot to viewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tommy. It was an honor to be here.